I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to share about my near-death experiences, and I'm going to show you pictures of our return trip to Zimbabwe, my first return trip. So this is an image of when we were close to finding the first village, and John was kind of running behind me with the camera as I was really sensing into, and just my body was telling me which way to go. And when I was watching the video for this, and it came to this spot, I was totally blown away, because right where the sunburst is just up the hill where I had my second near-death experience. So watching this video just was extraordinary for me. All right. Mm-hmm. So when I was 8 years old, I was living in the US, and my parents were neglectful and abusive, and I tended to be exposed to a lot of not mentally well adults, and one of those adults spotted me and chose me to abduct. It was 1977, so a few years after the Vietnam War had ended, and so it was a really difficult social climate in our culture in America then. There was a lot of people who were overwhelmed, and there was a lot of just kind of people more surviving on their own and kind of keeping to themselves. So child protection wasn't anything at all what it is now. A lot of child protective services hadn't even been developed. There weren't even national laws around child abduction at that time. So it was a very different landscape than we're used to now with, our tracking children, watching children, putting helmets on children. So there's just a lot that's changed around that for the better. And so in that time period, like I say, I think California had just developed their child protective services like maybe a year or two before. And the state that I was in didn't have much developed at all, which was Delaware. So that was the climate. Like I say, hi, welcome. He chose me to abduct. In that time period, there was also, go ahead to the next one. There was a magazine called Soldier of Fortune, and this magazine was directed at gun enthusiasts, war veterans, and people who were interested in warfare. And so this was an ad in the back of that magazine, and recruiting men to come and fight in the Rhodesian army. And so and there was also in the spring edition of Soldier of Fortune, there was an article that was explaining to people who were readers of the magazine how they could apply and get over to Rhodesia within a month and be fighting within a month. And so they were really targeting men who had maybe been in the Vietnam War, who were maybe having trouble adjusting back into being a civilian and not being a soldier, and inviting them that they could come have a gun in their hand again. So it's possible that the abductor saw that magazine, and I was abducted in June. He came to my school at the end of the day, and I was a kid who walked home instead of took the bus home, so I kind of just dilly-dallied and hung around, and the school was kind of cleared out. Like I said, it's very different than it is now in terms of watching out. And so he actually came in the school and grabbed me and took me out of the school. Like I said, there was no teachers left, no other students left, so he had a very easy time with that. He took me away in his car, drugged me, and the last memory that I have is of him putting me actually in a duffel bag. And I was very skilled, since I was already an abuse survivor, I was very skilled at coping with dangerous situations and dangerous adults. So I really very much had to use my intuition to figure out kind of what kind of crazy he was and figure out my strategy to survive it. So then when I became conscious again, I was in an apartment, and I was quite disoriented, and the drugs were still affecting my thinking. But then I saw him in a uniform. And like I said, I had to figure out how I was going to psychically survive so that I did not become like him. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I didn't know it at the time, but he had taken me to what was then called Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe. And I was in an army barracks, and he was very violent. My life was really in danger at every moment. And at one point, I defied him, and he attacked me, and he kicked me in my ribs. And I made it out into the hallway, and it was actually a neighbor who opened the door, and I don't know whether they dragged me in or I crawled in, but they saved my life. And at that moment, I thought, I want to die. This has been a pretty horrible life in my first 8 years, and I wanted to cross over. And the angel came down, and she told me it wasn't my time. And I said, I want a new angel. Like, that's not useful to me. I'm in pain, I'm coughing up blood, and I want to go. I want to go back to my source. And she said, reassuring things about, you'll stay. And I said, I'm not having that. I want to go. So the MPs came and took me to a hospital. And it was a children's hospital. And I was there for a number of days, probably maybe like 3 days or so. And unfortunately at that time, again, he was claiming to be my father. And I think he was very intimidating to people, so nobody challenged him. And so when he came to get me from the hospital, nobody stopped him. So he took me with him, and he transported me to a market. Go ahead and go. Okay. So this is actually, we found the hospital, and we found the hospital bed. And this was an incredible moment for me. And it was because, of course, it being 40 years, me being traumatized, I had to take into account that there might be some things I'm remembering wrong, or they didn't happen in the order I thought. But when we got to this, we checked out different hospitals on our trip, and the first one, I didn't feel like I'd ever been there before. And when we went to this one, my body knew, my body remembered. And when we went on the children's ward, and I walked down the 4 beds, and I held on to this one, I said, this is where I laid. And the part that made our research easier is that Zimbabwe doesn't have a lot of money for remodeling. So things are literally just as they were. And as John stated, that's probably the exact bed frame, and is potentially even the same quilt. So that was an incredible moment for me to have my first alignment of my 40-year-old memories and physical reality line up. So we got to the market, and he went and did military business, and he spoke to he was Caucasian, and he spoke to a native black African man. I didn't get to hear their conversation, but there was some kind of exchange that happened that I was then going with the black man. And the person who was the abductor, he literally got in a military jeep and drove away. And so it was mixed for me, because on the one hand, I just got rid of the worst enemy in the whole world. And on the other hand, he was the only person who knew where I came from. So I just lost my ride home. And so I was in this market, I'm with this new man who I know nothing about, and he eventually directs me that we're going to go on a bus that looks something like this. This is a more modern picture. So we get on the bus, and the bus goes out of the market and goes for several, maybe an hour, 2 hours, and the bus breaks down. And we're instructed to all get off the bus and start walking. And so I'm just a few hours out of being out of the hospital. I've run out of painkillers in my body, and I just can't keep up. And the man who is, I'm in his care now, he starts kind of pushing me to keep up with the group. And he pushes on my broken ribs, and I turn around and I bite him. And he kind of, what is this awful child? And so he just walks on, and I'm left alone. And I try to run to keep up with the group, and my ribs, it's just, if you've ever had broken ribs, it just kind of sends like white lightning pain. And so I just gave up. And I sat down and I thought, this is how I'm going to die. I'm just going to have this sun, and I'm just going to dry up like a puddle. And that's going to be mercy. And so I sat down and watched the bugs and played with sand in my hand and was just waiting to die. And then a truck came along. And it was full of fully armed, black military men. And I thought, this is how I'm going to die. And what happened is that one of them got down from the back of the truck, came over, picked me up, and took me back around and put me on the truck. And I had no idea, of course, they don't speak English, and I can figure out nothing about what they're saying. And so we drive for a ways, and the road is very bumpy, which is, of course, very difficult when you have broken ribs. And we get to a place where it's no road anymore. We're just traveling over land. And we arrive, and this time he saw the pain in my face when he picked me up by my ribs. So this time he picks me up by my hips. So there's some kindness. There's some humanity of trying to take care of me. And he sets me down, he gives me some of his water from his canteen, and the driver is kind of pointing with his lips and kind of gesturing, like, go there, little girl. And I look over, and there's actually huts that I wouldn't have even noticed if he hadn't really pointed them out. And so once they leave, I collapse. The whole time I thought, I had no idea what they were going to do it to me. And so I literally collapse on the ground. My body is just melting out that stress. And again, I watch bugs. I watch the wind blow the grass. And I don't really know what I'm going to do next. So it starts getting dusk, but I hear dogs barking, what I think are dogs barking near the village. So I think, that doesn't seem like a good idea to go there when it's getting dark. So I find a tree. That's fine. So I find a tree. There's very big fig trees. And I climb up in there, and I decide, this is home. This is my home, this tree right here. This is my place in the world. I'm going to make my nest, and I'm going to be here. So in the morning, I hear singing. I hear women singing. And it's joyful, and it's celebratory, and I want to be close to it. And I'm hungry, and I'm so thirsty that my tongue is swollen. And so I go near the singing. And I creep over, and I'm kind of hiding behind some trees. I probably wasn't as hidden as I thought. And so these women spot me, and they're mashing food, and they spot me, and they kind of are looking, why is there a Caucasian girl here? And so I run away, and they bring back some food, and I run away, and then I come back and I eat it as fast as I can like a little animal, and it's yellow and mushy, and I don't know what it is, and it's food, and it's great. And then I run away, and they bring back some water, and I drink it all at once, and as I run back away, it sloshes around in my stomach. And what happens is that it's the children who welcome me in. It's the children who gather around me, and I'm, at this point, a very defended person. I'm armored. I block the world out. I'm surviving on my own. I've been kind of leaning into the storm of trying to survive every minute on my own. So these children come over, and I kind of recoil, but they don't hit me, and they're touching my hair that was blonde then, and they're touching my skin and seeing what that's about. And they take me to some place, and it's the fire circle. And one of the older girls, she goes in and she gets some charcoal from the fire, and she starts putting it on my skin. And then she's putting some black ash on my skin. And she's telling a story. And so she'll put some on my skin, and then she'll make a pronouncement, and she's so dignified. She can stand up straight, and I am all curled forward. She knows where she's from, and I don't. She knows her name. And she's giving me story. She's storying me in. I finally get it that she's pronouncing. And she came to our land this way. And I'm interpreting this, of course, she's speaking Venda and not English. And I'm realizing I'm becoming part of, they're welcoming me in. They're including me. And they're making me look like them. And all the children join in, and they're putting black ash in my hair and on my face. And it is the most amazing moment of my life. And I have my very first sense of belonging and being wanted. So what happens next changes my life. There's a woman that's come, and she's sitting on a bench, and she starts singing to me. And I'm so entranced by her singing, I don't even notice that the other children go off to play. And she's calling to me to come to her. And again, I'm very, she's bigger than me, she could trap me, she could hit me, my ribs are still hurting. So I'm very cautious in following this call to come join her. But her singing is feeding me. It's nourishing me, every place in me that's so hollow, that's so broken. Her song is soothing inside me. And so I go to that song, I go to the source of this healing medicine. And I get closer to her, and she's calling, and she wants me to look up at her. And I don't look at adults because I'm so ashamed. And I'm also so afraid of looking at adults in the eye and getting their insanity into me. So she's calling me to look at her, and I'm fighting inside myself, and she seems good, but what if she's not? And eventually her song is just wearing me down, and I look her in the eye, and I see mothering. I see love. I see care for me and my well-being. And she continues singing and healing my whole insides all the way through. And I lean forward into her and I collapse. And I'm letting her be my shelter. I'm letting her be my home. I'm letting her be my mama, because I so desperately need to be mothered. And she holds me and rocks me and continues to sing, and I just drink it all in. And so these people become my new family. This village, this community is probably about 20 or so people, community of huts. They become my new family. They teach me their songs. They teach me how to plant in the field. And I think, this is my life now. I have become part of this, and this is where I'm going to grow up. So this is an image to honor this woman that sang to me. I call her Mamietan, and I drew her symbolically as a turtle. And there's the native mythology of that the world was created on the back of a turtle. And so this is an image of that my world rested on her back. And this is also another image of the man who became like a father to me. I remembered his name as Atto, and we just a couple weeks ago got confirmation that his name was Tolo. And so this was my picture to honor him, and he had the courage of a lion, and he was the first man I ever met who loved bravely, that his masculine strength was protective and soft, and that he could laugh with Mamietan like the world just could be rocked open by their laughter. His jaw was so big, and when he smiled, it was his whole face. And so from them, I learned about joy, and I learned about connection, and I learned about what it is to be a child held in safety. And so one day I was playing by myself, and I wandered a little bit far from the village, and I was off by a creek gully. And at that creek what had happened earlier, it was a very positive place for me because Mamiatan and another woman, Mama Mbira, they had taken me to that creek one day and undressed me, and then they went into the creek and they got clay because my ribs were bruised from here and they were still in that kind of purple stage. And so they sang and they put clay on those bruises. And they sang to me, and it was so fierce, like they were getting the hatred out of me of when he attacked me. And then they were calling me to sing with them. And once I was able to sing with them, they considered me well again. But that was their definition of I was okay, is that I could sing again. And I was so proud that I sounded kind of like them. And I was able to open my voice and, kind of be a little tiny version of Mamiatan and her huge, beautiful singing. Yeah. So I wandered too far to that creek, and on this day, something very different happened. I was playing and watching the water go by and sparkle in the creek when I heard a noise. And I looked up, and my whole body froze. And it was one of the soldiers who I had seen who was not from the ones who had brought me here, but some of the very aggressive soldiers. And I looked up, and he raised up his gun. And when his gun barrel became just a circle, I begged him for mercy. I begged him to see with his original eyes that I wasn't his enemy. And I couldn't understand how the people of this village were welcoming me in and caring for me, and he saw me as just a target. So he didn't hear my call for him to see me as the child that they saw, and he pulled the trigger, and the bullet grazed the top of my head and blew me off my feet. And I began to cross into death. And my life force went out of my body, came back in my body, and eventually just rocked right out the back of my heart. And when I crossed over, I arrived someplace, and I didn't know where I was or what had happened. And I didn't know if I was a person. I didn't know if I had a body. But what happened next is that someone touched my face. And I remembered I have a face. And then this loving feminine hand touched the other side of my face. And I remembered I have a body. And then I could see again. And I opened my eyes to see these two beautiful women. They were black and they had yellow dresses. And I remember them. They were so familiar. And they seemed like I had met them before, but I couldn't quite name them. And they seemed like my big sisters who were protectors of me. And they pointed to the side, and I looked over, and there was a big glowing sphere. And I suddenly remembered if I go in that sphere, I will be fully restored, and the sphere won't be diminished at all. It has enough to fill me up and 1,000 other people and never be diminished. And so I started going with them into the sphere, but then I remembered that would mean leaving my African family. And they just named me Aisha. They just gave me a naming ceremony and I belong there, and I don't want to lose my African family. And so this turmoil started sending me backwards, and I was falling backwards and falling away from them. It had been so bright, and now it was getting dark, and where am I landing? And I landed in this cold stairwell. And it felt damp, and it felt kind of like something you would imagine in Ireland, of like, it's wet and it's cloudy and it's stone and it's old, and the stairs were off to my right and the stones were worn down, and there was another stairwell, and I thought, oh, I had it better before. And I didn't know how to quite get up, and I felt so weak and like a newborn deer. And then all of a sudden there was this man next to me, I had no idea where he came from. He just appeared. And he looked kind of old and rickety and like he was dying. And I thought, he's worse off than I am. And he offered his arm so I could help me up. And I thought, I'll just pull him over. And I was trying to do it on my own, but I couldn't get up because the stone was kind of slippery. And so I finally accepted his help. And when I touched his arm, he was far sturdier than I expected. And so he starts gesturing that I should go down the stairs with him. And I think, I don't know this place, but he seems to know where we're going. And I start walking down the stairs, but there's something dripping on my shoulder, and I think maybe it's something dripping from above. And I check, and it's blood. And it's blood from my head. And I show it to him, and I'm panicked. And he nods his head, he knows. And he encourages me more, that's why we're going down the stairs. So we enter into this stone archway into a dark cave, and I think, I really had it better before. And he's encouraging me to go through, and what's in there? I go in, and it's all my own fears I hadn't expressed. It's all the screams I held back from when I was being abused. It's all the times I was telling myself it was my fault that adults were doing this to me. And it was bouncing off everywhere, and he was guiding me through so I didn't get lost there. And I looked into his eyes, and for one moment, I could see myself as he saw me, and that it wasn't my fault, that the abuse that happened wasn't my fault. And when I accepted that, everything became quiet. We were able to continue through the rest of the cave, and we came out to a cliff. And on that, there was a cliff, and there was night sky, and there were stars. And it felt different than any night sky I'd ever seen. The stars were so colorful and bright, and they were like living relatives. Like I could feel the life connection between myself. And I looked at him, and I wondered if he came from there, if he was one of those stars, and that he chose to come help me. He chose to help me through that, my own dark cave, so I didn't get lost. And I realized he could go anywhere. And he came to serve me. And my trust in him was so full now. And so I looked at him, and we didn't need to talk with words, and I asked him, where are we going next? And he nodded off the cliff edge. And so I put my hands in his, and together we leapt off. And so this represents, he's the upper bird and I'm the lower bird, and he's guiding me through this night sky. And so we glide through this night sky until we come, and it changes into morning sunrise. And he nods to me, there's the sphere again, but this time it's 100 times bigger. And he nods, go there. You'll be renewed. It's your source. It's home. And so he flies off back to where he comes from, and I'm flying on my own, and I think, I feel his steadiness inside me, even though he's not beside me any longer. And I think, okay, I could go to the sphere, but I really want to tell my African family about this man that I just met who helped me through this cave, and I want to get back to my African family, and well, there's that grass field down below, and maybe they're down there, and I'll get back down to them, and I'll find them there. And so I direct myself, and I fly down to this grass field. And I start running around and calling out for them, and I'm not hearing anything, and I'm getting more and more desperate. And what if they're hurt? What if they can't call back to me because they're injured and they're laying on the ground? And so I get more and more upset, and the grass is getting taller until I'm just pushing through this jungle of grass. And I'm calling out for them, and they're not calling back to me. And I finally get so exhausted, I just lay down on the ground and I cry until I'm like a storm cleared out. And when I get up, I hear a noise, a little shuffle. And I kind of look through the tall grass and I see something like somebody's robe that's cream colored, and I think, why didn't they call back to me? And I start going towards this person because maybe they'll help me get back to my village. And I go and I find him, and I'm so desperate, and I want to ask him about how do I get back to them. And when I stand before him, he is the presence of peace. He is so still. He's like a mountain lake without a ripple. And I suddenly can't even remember why I would ever feel agitated, why I would ever feel desperate. And he hasn't even touched me, but I feel held by him. And he's got a robe on with sleeves, and he's got a beard, and he has a sheep herder's staff. And I'm trying to figure out who he is, and then his face changes to a lion. And I'm confused. Why did his face change? And I want it to stay the same. And then I look again, trying to figure out, he's a lion. No, his face changes. And I think, I want to show this to Atto. And his face changes to Atto. And my heart bursts open with love. I love Atto. And then his face changes again to a child that I don't know. And the love in my heart stays the same. I didn't know I could love a stranger as equally as I could love somebody who had been so good to me. And the face changes again, and now it's kind of fun. He's like a kaleidoscope. And I realize what he's teaching me is the form doesn't matter. It's about the connection. It's about the who am I and how open can I be to connect to people. And what happens next is extraordinary. He bends down and touches his forehead to mine. And in that moment, I can see as he sees. And that there are living lines like golden spiderwebs connecting every person from my heart to every living being, to every frog, to every tree, to every mountain, every creature in the oceans, all oceans. And I realize even if I lose my African family, I'll always be connected because I'm part of a greater family. So I continue with him, and I come back when he's no longer touching my forehead. I go ahead and lean. I have so much devotion, so much trust of him, that I lean my whole being into him. We travel through a tunnel of light. We come out above my body. So we're hovering above, and my body is here, and my Mami Atan has found me, and she's pulled my body up onto her lap, and she's rocking me, and she's wailing, and I want to comfort her, and I want to tell her, I'm just fine. I'm not in pain. I'm taken care of. I'm totally held. And I want somebody to come and comfort her and feel the love that I'm feeling. And I look at her and I suddenly understand how she could love me so fully because I can see how her mother loved her. And so I begin to back up from that scene as if it's like my body is like a suit that I no longer need. And it's like just a chapter I'm closing up in an envelope, and I'm starting to go into this beautiful living stream of air. And I continue along there, and I meet several more beings who purify me and help me remember that I'm made of what they are, light, love, from original source. And that my wounds and injuries and the difficulties that had happened in this lifetime were leaving me. I was shedding them off like things I no longer needed. They were just behind me. And what happened is that my Mami Atan, she changed her wailing into singing. And I began to hear her. All these veils had closed behind me like leaves over a secret garden. And her song was so powerful, it penetrated through those veils that had closed. And I began to hear her. And I was going forward towards the light, towards the great heart, towards the source where I was originally a sound sung by the great heart. And I was pain-free, and I was going home. And then I heard her song, and it reminded me that I hadn't done my purpose. And by this time, she's called on the ancestors, and the song is so powerful, it's surrounding me. And it opens up my memory that I'm a medicine singer like her, and that I haven't done my purpose. And my desire to be part of the choir, all the beings here who are medicine singers, I wanted to be part of that group again and do my part and contribute my voice. And so that desire turned me around, and I came back to life. And when I came back, I was full of pain again, and she was holding me, and the others from the village had arrived, and they took me back into the huts. And they put medicine on my head to stop the bleeding, and they did prayer to make sure that the hatred that had been on the bullet was cleared off my head, so I wouldn't go through life confused by that hatred that came with the bullet. And I understood everything. I could hear them, even though I was now back in this realm, I could still hear them without needing the words. And I could hear what was in their hearts, and I could hear their whole lives. And so I worked on recovering for days, and they took care of me and fed me. And after like a couple days, 2 days or so, I was able to get up and move around and be a little bit more mobile. And the soldiers who had had a battle near the village, which is why I was shot, they came back. And they attacked the village. And I was in a hut when I heard the shooting start. And Mama Inambira was in the hut with me, and she also heard the shooting, and she covered me over, she hid me. And when she thought the shooting was done, she grabbed me on her hip and went outside of the hut. And what I saw broke me open. Atto was down. Atto was not moving. And I wanted to go to him and sing to him and bring him back, just like Mami Atan had done for me. But Mama Inambira wasn't stopping. She was running. We were escaping. And so she was running, and I was on her hip, and the bullets came from that direction. She went down, we both went down. And when I recovered from my surprise, I looked back at her, and she was telling me to go, go. And I wanted to pull her with me, but she was yelling at me, and she had never yelled at me before. And she was yelling at me to go. And so I followed her instructions, and I ran. And I made it about 30 feet. And I didn't have enough blood pressure to keep going. And I went face down, my knees buckled. I was trying to make it to the trees along the Limpopo River as my cover. I didn't quite make it, but I went down in the sand, and my body just gave out again. And I looked around, and I was in a different place, and it was white and very blank, and there was a horizon line, and there was a song happening on that horizon line. And it was very simple, and I couldn't hear it, but I just heard, and I thought, that's the song to Three Blind Mice. And so something moved me towards it, and then I got closer, and there were words, like on Sesame Street, and the words were, "You will live, you will live." And I thought it was like a school nursery rhyme I had to memorize, so I was trying to memorize because there was a little blue bouncing ball. And I was very confused, and my brain wasn't working quite right, and I really appreciated the blue bouncing ball, because otherwise I just really wasn't going to follow it. And so I started to sing along, and then I realized it was a message to me that I would live. And I thought, did I die again? And I looked around, white horizon, nothing around, don't feel my body. Oh, I've died again. And so I get curious about who's singing this song to me. And I start to see a record player, like a vision being shown to me, a record player. And the record comes to the end, the stylus comes to the end of the record, and the song ends. And then it's like the record is lifted off and shown to me, and I can see it close up, and it's got deep gouges in the beginning. And I think, well, this record is damaged. It should just be thrown away. And I hear a voice. The marks are how I find you, so I can love you. You will not be thrown away. And I realized that I thought that I should be thrown away because I was damaged. And the voice, I got curious, where is this voice coming from? And I look and I can see through this white veil in front of me, and there's a being. And he's male, but he looks kind of feminine. His hair is black, and his hair is up on a bun on the top of his head, and I don't think it's odd that his skin is the blue, like a blue poppy. And he has beautiful ornamentation around him and on him. And as beautiful as he is, I can tell he's incredibly powerful. And I'm a little scared, because it feels like if he moved this hand, he could create a mountain. If he moved this hand, he would destroy the mountain. And I couldn't believe I was getting to be in front of such a big, powerful being, and that his focus and attention was on me. And he began to show me images, and he was showing me a flat plain. And the plain started to come together, and it was this kind of violent coming up of a mountain, and it was such a big event, and I was kind of scared and stepping back, and then the mountain started to erode, and the sand was coming down, and pieces were coming down, and then hillsides were coming down. And he was showing me it was making a beach. And he said to me, shall we bring down the mountain so you can have the beach? And I said, no, I like the mountain and the beach. I love when my feet walk in the warm sand on the beach. That feels so good. And he said, destruction makes available the ingredients for creation. Bringing down the mountain is part of making the beach. What looks like total destruction now is making available the ingredients for creation. And I realized he was speaking to me about what had just happened. I had just lost my village. And I couldn't possibly imagine how that could be the beginning of any creation. And I came back to my body, and I was face down. There was sand in my mouth. My arm was stuck underneath of me. My jaw was injured. I felt broken. And then I looked over, and there was a plant next to me. And the stalk was still rooted in the ground, still rooted in the earth. And I thought, how is this plant still upright when my whole world has just been destroyed? How is this plant going up to the sky and to the earth? Doesn't it know it should just be leveled like everything else has been leveled? And I laid there and I thought, I want to die. And I heard the voice again, you will live. And this time it was a command, it wasn't a song. It was a command. And he said, pull yourself forward now. And I thought, I have no strength. And he said, dig in and push. And I tried, and I kind of got nowhere. And the command came again, pull yourself forward. and it felt like he gave me strength. And so I dug into the sand, and I pulled and I pushed a little bit with my foot, and I got about an inch. And he said, you have to get away, because when nightfall comes, the animals are going to come. And you have to get further from the smell of blood. So pull yourself forward now. So he commanded, and I followed. And I made it 3 inches. And then after a while, I was 2 feet. And then I would give up. Pull forward now. And I would follow his command. And it wasn't my will. It was his will. I didn't have the plan. He had the plan. I didn't know where I was going. And he showed me an image of you're going to the well. Tomorrow people will come to the well. So you're going to the well. So I pulled myself forward for hours. And then I finally got to the tree line along the Limpopo, and I'm done. I fell asleep. And I had a dream of everyone from my village who had died. And they were free. And they were like the river going past me, and I was like the tree that was planted right here. And they were fluid and moving around me and heading on, and I wanted to go with them. I wanted to join because they were going home together. And I railed against that I was a planted tree, and they went on. And it was easier for me when I could no longer see them. And I knew they were going home to beauty, and I was staying here. And when I woke up in the morning, the God of mountains are destroyed to create beaches. His command was softer. Pull yourself forward. And so I did some, and then there was a new presence, and it was more feminine. And it wasn't a command, it was an invitation. And so she would show me a beautiful little leaf over there that the light just shone on so perfectly, and I wanted to go see that. So I would kind of move myself, not based on command, but just curiosity and wanting to see nature. And so she moved me closer to the well. And from there, a woman did come and find me. And she moved my limbs, and she got water and washed the blood off my face and refreshed me, and she ended up tying me onto her back like I was a baby and carrying me back to her homestead. And when she got back to her homestead, people saw that she had a wounded white child. And understand that in this war there were many factions, and that for a rural black family to have a wounded white child was very dangerous for them from multiple sides. They could be either accused of abducting me or accused of siding with the enemy. So either way, if she was caught, it was not good. And so when others saw me, they said, "Don't bother with her. It's too dangerous." And she said, "I won't throw her away. She is a living human being. I won't throw her away. She is a living human being." And so she kept me covered and protected me and kept me hidden during the day, so even her neighbors wouldn't see that she had me. Go ahead. And one of the things that when I was lying there before Mir Lucy found me is that I looked up and the monkeys were running around and moving. And I thought that was my first sign that not everybody had died. It was the first life that I saw after the attack on the village. And then Mir Lucy found me. So she hid me and arranged, talked to others there to start talking about like how could they get me back to white people? How could they get me out of Rhodesia? And so they were making arrangements with the nearest white family across the river into South Africa. And so this is the Limpopo River, And so on this side this is actually when we were crossed over. So on this side is South Africa, and on the other side is Zimbabwe. So you can see during this season, you can literally just walk across the river, it gets so low. And so she also brought in healers, and his name is Julius, and he was one of the medicine singers there. And he sang to me to help heal my wound. And what I realize now is that their singing healed more than my body. Their singing opened me in ways that nothing else could have. So I was taken across the Limpopo River, given to the Roos family, like I said, the closest white farmers. They took care of me for a time. And what was happening is that I was going into what's called parasympathetic shock. Like once the survival level had come down, I literally was just collapsing into a place where the body was in so much conservation of energy that I practically had no heart rate and no breathing. So, of course, that was very, very confusing to them, and so I was taken to the hospital. And so in our return trip, we retraced all these steps. So during the war, the South African side built a barbed wire, and you said live wire fence to keep the war on the other side. And so a white farmer was a gatekeeper for each of these openings into that fence. And so a white farmer had to come and open that gate in order to let people through. So this is, as best we know, the exact gate that I was brought through. And so I was taken to a whites-only hospital in South Africa. And so I went from being touched and held and sung to and sleeping next to people in small spaces and eating together to this oppressive environment. And that the nurses told me, it was so terrible for you over there with the black people, and you're so much better off now. And what was true for me is that I was dying of loneliness there. No one was touching me, no one was singing to me. I couldn't find any of the warmth or the freedom, and that what I learned is that to be the oppressor is incredibly damaging to people. And that those nurses took away my dress, my African dress that had been given to me, and when I asked for it back, they told me they didn't know where it was. And I felt ashamed for them that they were lying and that they believed those lies. And so my prayer is that we're able to heal both sides, all the damage that happens from racial oppression, for the oppressor and the oppressed, and every aspect of that. And that may healing happen for those nurses. So this is my image I drew of really having to, frogs can go underground in Africa if there's a drought, and they can kind of live out the drought underneath. They can make their heart rate so slow and their metabolism so slow that they don't actually need resources. And so that's what I did to myself, is I buried myself, I buried my relationships with all the people I loved. I buried their names. I buried being family deep inside so nothing could touch it. So now I'm going to get to share with you the videos of our return trip. And so the journey, I've been writing my book about all of this for 8.5 years. I started writing when John and I, the first week we got together. And John and I have a soul contract of doing this mission together. And so that's why the writing began when I got together with him and I could feel his support and container. And when I wrote my first 7 pages and I brought it to him, and he took 2 hours to read 7 pages. I could hardly stand it. And then he handed it back to me, and he had circled a sentence and he said, make that a paragraph. And he had circled a paragraph and said, make that 5 pages. Unpack it. Tell us more. Tell us how you felt. Because my first writing of it was in a very traumatized, kind of dehydrated voice without emotion. And so he has served me to this story for 8.5 years. And at first I'd be mad because he'd tell me to do more. And I'm like, that's all I could do. I'm done. I'm tired. And he just kept asking more. Tell us more. Tell us what you were wearing. Tell us what you ate. Tell us the smells. Tell us everything about this place so that we can come with you. And so it became time to return. That I needed to know where I had been. And so we started researching each night. He would bring up pictures of different places and I would say yes or no, like that's familiar or that's not familiar. We looked at huts, we looked at the soil color, we looked at trees, we looked at the dress, the body type of people. And everything I said yes to was within the same 100-mile area. And most of it was in the same 20-mile area. And I think sometimes he would like throw something in from like a country far away and I would say, no, never seen it. And from there, we needed to find people to connect with. And so through the most amazing synchronicities, I ended up finding Dina Metzger, who was a writer who goes to Zimbabwe. And she connected me to Chris Liebenberg, who connected me to David in Botswana. And David sent over a letter to Vanessa and Digby Bristow. And they live right next to the Marimani community. And I think the email that David sent was, this might sound crazy, but. And so John and I had gotten together like an 11-page summary of the facts so that they could follow along what had happened and see, can we find anybody still alive who remembers me? And so it was about 4 months into conversations with Vanessa. And at first they thought they found somebody who remembered an abducted white child, but it turned out to be another abducted white girl, because that was actually happening a lot during that war. And so then she found somebody who did remember me, and the details were specific enough, but we were just trying to stay neutral, like, well, could still be another wounded white girl. And so she sent a 4-minute video interviewing this woman who remembered Aisha. And John took hours to download, and he was at his cubicle where he's a contractor, so he can do things other than work. And he watched this 4-minute video, and when she did this, I'll let you tell.
Oh, well, so nobody knew where Robin was wounded, really, except for you and I, as far as I can tell. So this woman in Africa, is explaining what happened and how Robin was wounded with her hand like this. And that's exactly how Robin describes her wound when she's describing it to me. And I shot out of my chair because how would she know? And so then I just thought, oh my God, this is it. And so I got Doug, who's my boss there. He said, Doug, you got to see this. I get him over there.
And Doug's read my manuscript.
Right, Doug's read the manuscript, and we're both freaking out. So it was really amazing that after, this was probably 7 years at this point, that
we had our first person, and she was alive, and she remembered me. And so from there, we started making plans to return. And so I could meet her and be reunited with her. And I want to say how much it meant to me. I did a crowdfunder because, of course, it's a trip that was a little beyond our means. And people came from everywhere to give us money. It was incredible. And people gave us $10,000 to do this trip. And amazingly enough, we had planned it out, and we came within $100. So I just felt it was so healing to me, because when I was abducted as a girl, I was taken alone. And the piece I didn't share is that when from the hospital, we don't know what agency arranged my return back to the US, but I was returned back to my family. And there I was told very clearly, never talk about this. And my mom actually hit me when I tried to talk about it. And I crawled under the bed, and I remembered the shell of the child I needed to be in that house. And I put myself back in that shell, and it was such a small space that the names and the memories and the connection to everybody, I had to leave it outside of myself. And so many people who do their healing work to recover their childhood can bring home the parts of themselves that they might have left or compressed or hidden. And so that was that moment where I just had to survive. And so I didn't talk about my history again until it started exploding forth when I was in college, which often happens for a lot of people. Once they get safe, then their body just starts expressing it. So with all these different people, we have the video, we're making the return trip arrangements. People are donating money from all over the world. And so we come in, and we're not even, Vanessa has picked us up, and we're driving to her house. Like I say, it's right next to the Marimani community. And we haven't actually made formal arrangements of how we're going to meet up with Mayamu. Things are very casual there, and you just kind of run into the right people at the right time. So that's a little foreshadowing. So we're driving in. We're in a Land Rover, something like that. And you can see the dirt road. It's kind of rough. And coming out, going to Bite Bridge, is a, what they call them, the donkey carts.
Yeah, donkey carts.
Donkey carts. And so John's in front, and he says, "Vanessa, isn't that Mayamu?" And Vanessa says, yes, it is. And so she stops the vehicle, and they're pulling the donkey cart to the side, and literally Mayamu and I get out for the first time in 40 years. And after they gave me to the other side, they never knew what happened to me. They had rumored that I was sent back to the US and that I died.
And are they clear that Mayamu is Mary Lucy's?
Oh, okay, thank you. And so Mayamu is the granddaughter of the woman who said, "I won't throw her away, she's a living human being." So I played with Mayamu as a child. And she put more black ash on me and fed me, and we were very close. She was about 14 when I was 8. All right.
So I'm holding the camera for part of this, and so my voice is disproportionately loud. So what you'll hear is me being blown away that this is happening. Like, oh, whoa, oh. Okay.
Hello. Oh.
She's very strong. She's practically picking me up off the ground.
Sorry. So, this was a chance meeting. Sorry.
That's Vanessa.
Aisha? Sorry.
She's saying sorry.
Sorry. Look. Sorry. Johnny, madam. Yeah. Who Johnny?
Rowan, Johnny.
Yeah, this is John.
Okay.
Hello.
Can I give you a hug?
And that's a bit of a cultural stretch, says it hug a white man.
These are really old friends. Wait a minute, I'll have this other side here too. There we go.
40 years.
This is very real for Robin right now. Chance meeting. I don't know, this is just more than chance, I don't know. Are you happy, Mayam?
I'm very happy with them. Yeah. I'm very happy. Yes. Yeah. Don't worry, madam. Don't worry, boss. Okay. Thank you.
And so, yeah.
Just realized I forgot to bring tissues. I usually bring tissues.
So Vanessa sees Mayamu by chance maybe once in every 4 years.
On that
That's what
road.
she said. And so this was stunning that we would just run into her on this road as we...
Thomas, could you get some tissue in the bathroom and distribute? Or because you'll definitely need it for this next one. So we made it, we all got back in the car, and I'm in the back seat, and we made it like maybe 3 minutes, and then I just come undone. And this is the first validation I've had in 40 years. And so remember, like, my family is just can't deal with this truth. They just, to this day, don't want to talk about it. And so when she was holding me, something inside me changed. Like, I didn't have to be the one to hold it anymore. I didn't have to be the one to remember it just by myself anymore. So I came undone in the back seat, and John and Vanessa decided maybe we should pull over. And so we recorded the conversation.
And you're inside my world now. And it's not words anymore. You saw our love. And you know now. And I've been trying to say it, and now you know.
Yeah.
And just the way she held me and just took me in right away. And like no time had passed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's real. It's been living inside me for so long. And now it's outside me too.
Yeah.
And it's this grass and those black stones
Mm-hmm.
and these trees
Yeah.
and this land and her and these people. And it's not all inside me. It's out here. And I'm gonna heal in a way I've never known. And you helped me. I don't have to just keep it alive inside me, because it's alive here. I've not known this feeling before. I've had to keep it alive inside me. And now it's so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than me. And you saw it. You saw it.
And that was our first day.